Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Israeli intelligence, despite its failure to warn ahead of the October 7 attack that Hamas will launch an offensive, correctly described a scenario in which Israel has to deal with simultaneous military challenges from several Iranian-directed fronts. It came to pass when Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Syrian as well as Iraqi militias joined the fight, the latter also hitting American targets. For some 100-odd days, a vast regional conflagration was averted, but this could change in the coming days and weeks. Who are the players and what are the prospects? Joining us all the way from the United Kingdom is retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, who formerly served as a senior director of the U.S. National Security Council and a U.S. Special Envoy for Syria as well, and currently the founding director of the American Center for the Levant Studies. Thank you for joining us, Colonel. Also joining us from Central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve, Yossi Kuperwasser, who is formerly an IDF intelligence directorate's research and assessment head, as well as the director of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, who currently is the project director on Middle East developments at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thank you for joining us, General.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you indeed. Here with me also in the studio is, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
So two facts are beyond dispute. The first is that Israel has been under attack. And the second is that Iran is on the offensive. Now, whether this offensive has been conducted directly, as we have seen in the missile barrage on Iraq and Syria, or indirectly, as in the exchanges of fire, and more than that, by Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and pro-Iranian militias acting out of the Syrian part of the Golan Heights or across from the Golan Heights. This is, of course, what we have to discuss. But if you look at the general trend, it is obvious that all of these Iranian proxies have converged to attack Israel and probably American interests, American allies and partners, and that Iran has tried to avoid being in direct confrontation with Israel, with the United States, and with other Western partners and allies here in the region. Whether this can remain the state of play or whether it will conflagrate and perhaps inflame the entire region is probably out of control for the various players, because who knows what will ignite the spark which will lead to a regional war.
Indeed. Well, Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to start with this question to you. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, everybody was shocked. Nevertheless, Russian President Vladimir Putin was quite explicit for several years about his intentions to do so. The same goes for the Gaza Strip. Everybody was shocked about the attack on October 7th. Nevertheless, Yahya Sinwar and other leaders of Hamas were quite explicit about their intentions to do so. Now, when we're looking about the Iranian declarations throughout the region to their proxies and followers, they're quite explicit about their intention to enter into this fight. They have yet to do so wholeheartedly. Nevertheless, their proxies are increasingly engaged on multiple fronts. And therefore, are we expected to get surprised when the Iranians enter the theater of conflict, or are we already looking at manners in which nothing is preordained and therefore there's still time to try and contain the situation as the Biden administration is trying to achieve?
No, containment has failed, and the attempt to seek detente, de-escalation, whatever you want to call it, has failed. Also, what happened in Erbil, what's happened with the IRGC seizure of the ship coming out of Iraq and firing a drone or a missile at vessels in the Indian Ocean. This isn't the Iranian regime entering a conflict this is the Iranian regime escalating a conflict that the Iranian regime itself started and has escalated all along. What's happening on all of Israel's borders is being fueled by the Iranian regime as a matter of Iran's regional strategy. What happened in Erbil is a matter of Iranian regional strategy. So we're seeing a broad conflict that's being prosecuted by the supreme leader and his regime. It's not something that they're a bystander to. It's not something that they're a late participant to.
General Kuperwasser, same question goes to you, and I'd like to highlight also three individuals who pretty much said the same thing, and that is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic in Iran, the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, and the foreign minister just recently, namely Hossein Amir Abdullahian, all highlighted that the Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa, as they call it, which they highlight, started on October 7th with Hamas's onslaught of Israel, is going to exacerbate, and they will emerge victorious. Now, even though when we're talking about quantifying strong power, they may be delusional, it does seem that the political campaigns in the United States are distracting the Biden administration from projecting strong power in a fashion that would deter them wholeheartedly at this moment in time.
Well, first of all, I think that we are already in a regional conflict. It's, as said, it was initiated by the groups that operate under the Iranian leadership. And that's where we are. And there are different intensity levels of the conflict in different arenas. But we are already in a regional conflict. There are so many fronts that are being fought simultaneously. And it's being fought also on the global level. It's affecting the global level. And it's affecting the security of the international free world. So it's something that is beyond just what's happening between us and Hamas or what's happening between us and Hezbollah. That's already the case. The Iranians understand that this war is going to define the future of the Iranian revolution, Iranian regime, just as it's going to define the future of Israel. And that's not only Israel and Iran are going to be affected by this war. Also, the free world in general is going to be affected. That's why it's a war of all these elements, and including also, by the way, those groups in the Middle East that are still not involved, like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and all of these people are going to be heavily affected by what's going to happen. So everybody's involved. It's not everybody's fighting, but everybody's going to be involved, and more and more people are fighting, and the intensity is growing. And the reason the intensity is growing is because Israel, unlike what was anticipated by Hamas, decided to take a very ambitious move and defeat Hamas. And that is something that, if Israel is going to be successful with, is going to shake the Middle East entirely. And the Iranians, whatever they do, and together with their proxies, is meant to deter Israel from doing that something that they are so fearful of, and refrain from defeating Hamas. That's the purpose of everything they're doing. So far, it's not clear whether they're going to be successful or not, because the threat of defeating Hamas is still hovering over Hamas in Gaza. But Israel has not made yet the decision to actually implement this move. And whereas at the beginning there was the question of whether Israel is going to start a ground maneuver, now the question is whether Israel is going to take over Rafah or not. And so the war is about whether Israel is going to take Rafah or not. That's what everybody is trying to convince us not to do, or the people that are on the Iranian side are trying not to convince us not to do. Some of the bystanders are also trying to convince us not to do it. But we have to understand, if we don't do that, we are not going to win the war. That's one thing. Now, beyond just fighting over Rafah and the Gaza Strip and Hamas, this is a war about the fate of the Iranian regime. If we win the war, then the Iranian regime is going to be suffering a very heavy blow, and the nuclear project and this entire structure of proxies is going to be hit dramatically. And if we don't hit the war, they are going to have the upper hand, and we are going to be suffering, and the United States is going to be suffering very heavily.
Indeed. Well, just to highlight, Rafah is a small strip of land, but very strategic in the Gaza Strip on the southern part, bordering Egypt, which is the only territory which allows the Gaza Strip to basically be open to the world via Egyptian territory, a territory that has been also subject to much of the smuggling of weaponry entering into Gaza, since the Islamist terror groups in the Gaza Strip obviously still have their own methodologies to succeed in this manner, and we'll keep that at that. But Mr. Oren, one thing that I don't only condemn the Biden administration for the wrongs it's doing, there are also some positives, and that is a strike that was conducted against the Houthis. Central Command has shown quite the robust resilience in not only protecting maritime shipping on multiple occasions, but also going after the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, dominated, of course, by the Houthi tribe, joined by the United Kingdom, which has also provided 4 Phantom aircraft to conduct precision bombings. Typhoons, excuse me. But when we're talking about this, of course, the Houthis came out and said, we're warning you, and we're going to fight both the United States and the West at large. The Islamic Republic is also threatening now the United States and Great Britain, alongside Israel, of course. But all in all, we're seeing now that this Houthi organization or tribe is managing to continue to extract damage from various vessels, commercial vessels, transiting the strategic waterway. Are we expected to seeing an increase of friction once more?
You know, usually when signals and messages are sent between adversaries, it is left for us to pontificate on them and try to interpret the meaning. But with Joe Biden, you can have it from the horse's mouth. He was asked about the strike, and he said, we sent a signal to Iran. You had it up front. And we know that there was an Iranian vessel which hurriedly left the port of Hodeidah just before the strike. Apparently, there are channels between Washington and Tehran. And even though Tehran wants, of course, to benefit from what is happening and from the troubles that Israel has, it wants to minimize the cost it is incurring while doing so. And the IRGC and the regime in general, they understand that should Israel go to a full-out war against Hezbollah, the next logical step may be going to war against Iran, because Israel would have almost nothing to lose by striking the Iranian infrastructure. Now, Israel cannot do it out of the blue. Usually there is a sort of a firewall by Israel just having its day-to-day routine, no justification for hitting Iran. But if there is a regional war, Israel could very well, the way the Iranians see it, strike Iran, which is why Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, always says that should there be a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah too will stop its actions against Israel. Obviously, the Iranians are fearful of what the Israeli action would be should Israel become desperate enough.
Indeed. Well, let's turn to a front that, even though I personally think that the Ansar Allah terror group, or internationally recognized as not a terror group, but rather the Houthis, or the 3 leaders of the Houthis are designated as such, they will make that miscalculation that may erupt into a broader issue. The northern front of Israel, particularly Syria, Lebanon, the western flanks of Iraq, as well along the border of Jordan, may have some intensification of hostilities in the next couple of weeks. And therefore, Colonel Rayburn, what measures should be focused on, and to what degree are we expected to see also Russia trying to secure its own interests in Syria, particularly with the Assad regime?
Well, before we turn to that, I want to just I want to touch on something that you just mentioned, which is the Orwellian use of language, where that makes a distinction between Ansar Allah and Ansar Allah's leaders, which are where the core of this organization is a tribe, and the leaders of the tribe are designated as terrorists. But the organization that they founded, that they command, that is them. There's a fiction, an Orwellian fiction, that's not a terrorist organization, and the end result of that is that there is not the full level of economic pressure and financial pressure on them and on their patrons in Tehran, in order to try to choke off the resources that go to them, at the same time that they're attacking international shipping, attacking U.S. naval vessels, attacking U.S. flagged vessels, essentially waging a war against the United States at sea, but their cash is untouched. Their cash flow is untouched. Their patrons are continuing to generate oil revenues day by day, and that's untouched. While these guys are setting the entire region on fire. This is an insane dysfunction in juxtaposition between what's actually happening and the legal fiction that the U.S. administration is trying to preserve right now. Now, further on your question about the potential conflict in the north, I mean, my personal view is that the Russians don't have any strategic combat power left over. They don't have the ability to project any strategic power other than what they've already got in eastern and northern Ukraine and in the Black Sea region. So I don't think the Russians are going to have to sit this one out. What they probably are doing, if I had to guess, is they're probably helping the Iranians with intelligence and other logistical support. And the Iranians are helping the Russians with material support, such as missiles and drones and so on. And we know all that. But I think the theater in the north that's at risk right in the immediate term is the one that was struck last night, which is Iraqi Kurdistan. So with the way that the Iranian regime uses it, pulls its strings on its proxies. If it's under pressure one place, then they will expand. They'll escalate somewhere else, and they'll go for an area that they think is more vulnerable. And they've focused in on Iraqi Kurdistan. Iraqi Kurdistan is one of America's closest allies in the entire region. They were struck directly, brazenly. It was an act of war. Let's call it what it was. By every legal standard, what happened last night was an act of war by the government of Iran against Iraqi Kurdistan. It was really against Iraq, against the sovereign country of Iraq. My friend Norm Rule, who's from the U.S., a veteran of the U.S. intelligence community, pointed out that in a normal world, what happened last night was the state of Iran committing an act of war against the state of Iraq, and the state of Iraq would have every justification for declaring war on the state of Iran as a result, for declaring that they're in a state of hostilities. There is a state of hostilities between the Iranian regime and Iraqi Kurdistan right now, but more importantly, against Iraqi Kurdistan because of the American presence there. Now, I think what we're in the process of seeing is there's a debate within the U.S. government about whether to acknowledge what I just said or not, or whether to cling to the thin rationale that because the U.S. consulate itself was not, a missile didn't land on it physically, and because there weren't American casualties and only Iraqi Kurdish casualties, that therefore the United States position is that the U.S. interests weren't put at risk, and the United States doesn't need to respond. I think that's no one in the Middle East will see it that way. A child wouldn't see it that way, but I'm afraid that's what is in the process of playing out. So we are still at this late stage in a situation where the United States is not ready to acknowledge the reality that everyone can see, and that's why President Biden. What Amir pointed out that he said the other day that he sent a message to Iran and he's convinced Iran doesn't want a war with the United States. Iran is already at war with the United States, and until the United States acknowledges that, then the thing will continue to escalate and escalate and escalate.
Indeed. Well, Quds Force Commander Khani, of course, already highlighted that Iran is at war with the United States on a number of occasions, and that Iraq would be the battlefield between the two sides, which was also acknowledged by the current National Intelligence Team in Washington during the onset of the intelligence reports that were published by the various agencies in Washington. But General Kuperwasser, I'd like to hear your position on this, and maybe also to highlight, for the sake of our viewers, that the fact that the central Baghdad government has condemned the strikes as a flagrant aggression and recalled its ambassador from Tehran for consultation, something that we didn't see in recent weeks, of course, or in recent months, and this may have also dire consequences to it, or maybe not. General Kuperwasser?
I think this was a clear act of aggression that should be responded accordingly. And, the point is that the Iranians allow themselves to do that because they understand that the United States is really determined to avoid confrontation with Iran. This gives them a very wide area to maneuver. Gives the Iranians a very wide area to maneuver because they can go farther and farther and farther and not see any real response against them. And with the attack on the Houthis, the Americans referred to the Houthis as the group that are operated by the Iranians, which was nice, but still they refrained from dealing with the Iran itself. And the fact is that the Americans have to understand this is not a war about Israel only. Israel, of course, is important, but this is a war against the West and against everything that the Iranian axis stands against. And it's not only Israel. Israel is just one element, the small Satan. The big Satan is the United States. They are fighting against both Satans simultaneously. And they believe that by weakening Israel, they will be able to weaken the big Satan as well. And if the United States tries to somehow avoid this reality, it's not going to work because they are going to come after her. And we see that gradually the Americans begin to understand it. The fact that they built this coalition to face the Houthis is one expression of that. We'll see what is going to be the reaction to the attack on Erbil. The pressures are mounting on the Americans to understand that it's about them. They really, the entire policy of the Americans that invited this policy of Iran was this, let's not run into a wide-scale regional war. If you're so much afraid from a regional war, then you are going to get it. That's where we are, unfortunately. Fortunately, on the other hand, we are much stronger than the Iranians and their proxies. We are more capable, and we can handle them. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be without casualties and the prices to pay. But we can win this war, and winning this war is going to be for the benefit of the United States, for the benefit of all the citizens of the civilized world, and for the benefit of Israel as well.
Mr. Oren.
Jonathan, you and maybe Joel and Yossi, you have all been impatient with the Biden administration, and understandably so. But perhaps we, if I include myself, we are too harsh on Joe Biden. Look at the constraints he's operating under. Even when he authorized this long-coming strike against the Houthis, 2 months after the Houthis started attacking shipping, he has come himself under attack by people in Congress who say that he has exceeded his authority under the AUMF, that he can't just authorize a strike, that he must go to Congress and get approval and telegraph his intentions to the enemy. And of course, this is in addition to the campaign season. And of course, Donald Trump already said, yes, he threw some bombs at the Houthis. It wouldn't have happened under my watch. So while it's very easy for us here tell Biden what to do the right thing. There are problems, and this is even without mentioning that he had to do all of that when his Secretary of Defense was in the hospital, which he has been released from recently.
Indeed. Well, 3 years in the making, Mr. Owen.
Okay.
3 years in the making. We're drawing near to the end of the program. A very brief analysis for each one of you. Colonel Rayburn, we'll start with you. You have 2 sentences. What are we going to expect in the near future?
Well, I have to disagree with Amir. President Biden is not under any pressure to restrain himself in defending, American interests, American allies in the Middle East. The kind of opposition that you're talking about in Congress is probably fewer than 20 people. The constraint on President Biden is coming from within his own administration and their own framework, which is that they still, at this late hour, don't want to give up the possibility of restoring some sort of deal with the Iranian regime. Until they change that, then you're going to get more conflict.
General Kuperwasser?
I don't think we are harsh on President Biden. We appreciate what he has done so far and the way he came and supported Israel. It's important. He did a lot of good things. But he has to understand the magnitude of what's happening. This is a world or a regional war, even if you don't want it to be. And if you don't fight it, you are not going to win it. In order to win the war, you have to fight it.
Mr. Owen?
Well, yes, Joe Biden is probably capable enough to defend himself. He doesn't need any reinforcement from this part of the world. But nevertheless, his containment strategy, which started on October the 7th, may be unraveling. And in our future programs, we will have to revisit it.
Absolutely. Well, this is all the time that we're for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Rayburn, General Kuperwasser, and Mr. Owen for taking out of your times to update us. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.